Right.
I'm sure I can. So let's keep it a bit freestyle today, Ev. And for everyone out there, let's just chat about a few simple things, some common myths that are out there, some of the dogma surrounding carbs, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes. So hopefully we'll kind of get a bit of everything in there for everyone.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so, first, could you, as basic as you can, could you explain the role of insulin for us, for everyone listening out there?
Okay, I think the best way to think of insulin is that it's really a traffic cop for our circulation, for what we have in circulation versus storage. So really what insulin does is it regulates the levels of glucose in our blood, but it also regulates the levels of fatty acids and amino acids.
Yeah.
So when we look at it from the other point, which is what Taubes focuses on, what it does to the fat cell, people said, well, insulin is a fat storage hormone. Well, yes, it is, but it's doing that to regulate the levels of fatty acids in the blood, because there can't be too many, because oil and water don't mix. So we need a ready supply, but we can't have too many. So insulin acts on the fat cells to work on the cycle of fats, and it works on, it pushes amino acids into the cells so that we can have protein synthesis, and it suppresses glucose production in the liver, and it enhances glucose uptake by the various cells, mostly the muscle, but also fat cells and some other ones.
Yeah, so it's got a lot of functions then, basically.
Yeah, it really has. Most people, I think, know of insulin from before they can remember, when they've ever heard of diabetes. They learn about some type 1 diabetic and how they have to take insulin. So most people have a very narrow view that insulin is just really has to do with glucose uptake, and that without insulin, the diabetic can't even use glucose, which is incorrect, because we can uptake glucose and use it just fine without insulin. It does, impact parts of glucose metabolism, etc., but it's not essential for glucose uptake and metabolism for energy. It's not essential for that. So.
I think insulin definitely is kind of associated with carbs in general to the general population anyway. And what people don't realise as well is that protein can let's say spike insulin just as much as carbs in some cases.
Yep, protein is insulinogenic, and what's interesting is that a lot of the people with the low GI, they look at trying to keep the glucose spike down, and they say, well, if you eat fats with your carbs, that this will keep your glucose level down, and yes, it does, and it does this by the fact that fats will enhance the insulin response. So it's actually the opposite. A lot of people think, well, if I eat a fat with a carb, and it slows the absorption, so I'm getting less of a glucose spike. It's not really true. You're taking up the same glucose. It's just the level doesn't go as high because the fat causes an increase in the insulin response, and which is kind of backwards from what some people think's going on.
So I know a lot of coaches over here. Well, actually, not just coaches, but everyone in the whole world, especially in the media, like to hail carbs as uniquely fattening as a macronutrient. And I'm sure everyone in the UK, especially, has heard the term "no carbs before marbs." But I suppose, Ev, you've not heard of that one.
No, I have not.
Oh well, we'll leave it there anyway. I'll explain that one later.
Okay.
And people kind of say, if you don't consume carbs when you're insulin sensitive, so an example maybe the morning, or if you don't consume them all post workout, or if you consume too many carbs in general, they can be stored as fat. And the process of carbohydrates being converted to fat is, in my eyes, extremely inefficient, according to the literature out there. Do you think I'm right in saying that, Ev?
Definitely. And even some of the people that say that carbs are fattening, will say that, because it's not, it's a known fact that it's about a 25% utilization of energy to convert carbs to fat. So if you have 1,000 extra carb calories, you're storing 750 calories worth of fat if it all gets converted to fat and stored. But that process has been shown over and over again. This whole notion, anybody that says that, the liver takes up the extra carbs, turns it into fat, and then it gets stored in your fat cells, anybody that says that is a significant contributor to body fat is incorrect, because it's just not what the literature bears out. Mark Hellerstein is probably the biggest researcher in that regard, and they've shown it over and over to be on the order of a couple of grams a day at most. And we do have some de novo lipogenesis going on in our muscle cells, it appears. I found a paper on that a while back, but this does not contribute to a net deposition of fat in the body. That fat then ends up getting oxidized or gets put through a cycle where it's converted back and forth and releases heat to keep you warm.
So just to confirm that for everyone, Ev, do you want to just explain what de novo lipogenesis is, just in case some people don't know what that was?
Okay. So de novo lipogenesis is the creation of fat from, it's actually from the acetyl-CoA. All carbs and fats are both broken down into a molecule called acetyl-CoA, which then goes through the tricarboxylic acid cycle, etc. So usually that acetyl-CoA goes through the energy-generating cycles, and it's the same molecule that comes from fats and carbs. But if you have a lot of carbs around, and so you've exceeded your uptake and you've exceeded the your glycogen stores, which is the first thing that's done to get rid of excess. If you've exceeded both of them, then at the point where you have the acetyl-CoA, the fat breakdown is essentially run backwards. It's not the same metabolic path. It's different enzymes, etc. But instead of fat being broken down into acetyl-CoA, the acetyl-CoA is stuck together and elongated into a fatty acid. And the fatty acid that it makes is palmitic acid, which is the kind of quote-unquote bad saturated fat that causes or is associated with some insulin resistance and other things. So, but it is also it is a primary component of body fat in humans. But I mean, we're talking grams. I mean, if you eat 1,000 calories of fat, for it to be stored as body fat, it's basically zero energy. It's a couple percent energy for it to just be basically shuttled off to your fat cell and stored. But if you eat excess carbs, they have to be converted into fat, and that process eats up about 25% of the energy that you would get out of it. So as I said before, you're already down fat, and then but it just really over and over again. And I this is one of the things I can give you a couple of good links about. It's just been shown that it's not a major quantitative pathway in humans, especially humans eating like the Western diet. So the so-called fattening diet, that it's not the carbs in the diet that are fattening.
So why do you think it is, overplayed then, the whole de novo lipogenesis process? Is it because, we've seen it happen in high rates in rats in the literature, and maybe humans have correlated that as happening in us, or do you think it's just the media in general?
I think it's a combination, because you're right. It occurs in the fat tissue of rats more than it does in humans. So you see, and rat diets are very and the rat diets are very low fat, high carb, but they're I don't know if I can explain this in a short period of time, but the rats are high gut fermenters, and so they create fats from the short chain fatty acids that are created there too. Plus, they have the enzymes in their adipose tissue to convert carbs and glucose to fat, which we don't apparently have significant amounts. In humans, it really appears that de novo lipogenesis in the fat cell is a good thing. It is considered, and it's questionable because they do a lot of these studies in rats, and this is one major area where it's different. But one of the first breakdowns that they see in humans with the fat metabolism and glucose metabolism is the inability to have small amounts of de novo lipogenesis in the fat cell.
Yeah.
So there's something signaling going on there. There's conflicting stuff about exactly what exactly is going on there, but you actually want de novo lipogenesis in your fat cells, at least a little bit of it going on, and but it's just not a major pathway. And then I think that it's just a catchy thing. Yeah. It was back when I was growing up, and I'm quite a bit older than you. There was always you eat fat, you gain fat, and actually it's true. More true.
More so than carbs.
Than with carbs. Yeah. But you have to eat in excess. If you're not eating in excess of your calorie needs, you are not gaining net fat.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I think that's something very simple people should take away, especially from this episode anyway, is that people like to demonize whatever macronutrient it may be, and in this case we're speaking about carbs, but it will still always come down to that calorie balance at the end of the day. Yes, it does, always.
And it's been shown over and over again in the metabolic ward studies. You can't create nothing. You can't create something out of nothing. If you consume extra, and calories really, in terms of food, they equate to mass. So if you consume, extra mass of energy, containing energy, and you don't burn that mass, then it's going to be stored.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard for some people to look at it that way, because when we burn fats and carbs, we produce carbon dioxide and we exhale it. So we don't burn fuel like a car, but we essentially do the same thing with different reactions, and the rest of the carbon mass escapes us with every breath that we take and exhale. The carbon dioxide is the product of burning that mass that we have taken in, and if we don't burn it all off, whatever we take in over some average period, then we have more of it in our body.
Yeah. So with all this demonization of carbs, and then you get your all the different diets that people follow, like Atkins, and even relatively new ones like carb backloading, that people will know what I'm speaking about. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, what they're really doing is attempting to kind of auto-regulate calorie intake, usually by restricting something, in that case maybe carbs, or restricting a time frame in which you can eat, and people see that as they'll say, "Oh, we're throwing out carbs," and then they'll demonize carbs. But at the end of the day, we're just cutting down the time frame in which you can eat.
If you cut down the time frame in which you can eat, then for most people, unless you're physically stuffing yourself, you're going to eat less.
Yeah.
And if you cut out an entire food group, you're going to eat less.
Of course.
And it's been shown that if you and what people call low fat, this 30% fat, that's not low fat. No. Okay, in terms of what human cultures have eaten for centuries. All right, we're talking 10 to 20% fat, not 30% fat. So if you cut somebody down to like 20% fat, and so you really do a real low-fat diet, like you would do a low-carb diet, you would see the same kind of weight loss, because if you can stick to it.
Yeah, it's all It's all about sticking to it at the end of the day, isn't it? And I think people will follow do you think people can if we let people eat what they want, or they had to follow a low fat, high carb diet, or they had to follow a high fat, low carb diet, people can auto-regulate their eating, eat more easily with a high fat diet. Do you think that's what a lot of people try and say?
I think, see, to me, I think there's a little bit of something to this metabolic flexibility between burning carbs and burning fat, so that people who are insulin resistant, I think they just feel better eating, not relying on carbs for energy.
Yeah.
And so that therefore they are more successful in losing weight to a point until I guess the insulin sensitivity should be restored.
Yeah.
But what happens is if you keep with that high fat diet, you are basically creating an insulin resistance that it may not be the same as some inherent metabolic defect or whatever, but you are essentially putting yourself into that metabolic state. So I do think that if you have some kind of a quote unquote balanced diet 24/7, all the time, it's more difficult for most people to eat ad libitum and maintain their weight. There's just so many different things going on. Yeah. Anybody who's ever gained a significant amount of weight and had to lose it is usually going to have much more trouble, preventing the regain than somebody who's never been heavy. And if you, kind of gain weight, a little bit of weight, and then you get past a threshold, it seems to snowball. So, it's all. I think that in a lot of these metabolic theories that people have, they totally ignore any psychological factors. And I'm not talking, some of the deeper psychological factors that some people have in certain eating disorders. I'm just talking about, going out to eat and everybody else is having pizza and you want a slice of pizza, So it's like that you have to feel like you're depriving yourself just because, there's that pizza. But it's like if you look at the calories and say, well, you know what, if I really actually burn 2,000 calories in a day, I could just eat that pizza that one day and it's not gonna kill me.
Yeah.
If I have my calories from the pizza versus that steak and spinach or whatever it is that we're all supposed to be eating, it's not going to change things. But I think the people that get the low carb diet, it's dehydrating. Mm. So it's a known thing. Even the diet book authors will tell you this. The first however many pounds is water weight because you deplete glycogen, and for every gram of glycogen, there's like 3 to 4 grams of water. Mm. Plus, it's also dehydrating a bit to the body, so you lose a little bit more water weight. And if you're the kind of person who retains water, you really lose a lot of weight. When you hear people on Atkins, this didn't really happen to me. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's just I'm not the kind of person that does. But when I would be in some of the low carb forums, and someone say, "Oh, well, I ate something carby last night and I gained like 8 pounds," and I'm like, "Well, it's not fat." Yeah. and they're like, "Well, yeah, but I can't lose it again." I'm like, "Well, but it's water because your body was so depleted of it, so it sucked up all the carbs and it replenished your glycogen stores, and so you have that extra water, but it's not like you gained 7 pounds of fat." And I think that people get stuck in that mode, but I don't think it's good to go around dehydrated all the time.
No. But also that element,
business, that there's some tricks and things to be done to look buff for figure competitions and all of that, and in those weight loss competitions like the Biggest Losers, they do a lot of stuff to manipulate their water retention. This is not necessarily, this is not something you want to be doing on a long-term basis.
No, for sure. So with the demonization of carbs, comes the, as we've just been speaking about, the advocation of the low carb diets. and especially in terms of insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. And with the basic common thought behind that is, carbohydrates stimulate insulin, repeated carbohydrate feeding leads to chronically elevated insulin, and chronic exposure of muscle cells to insulin may cause them to lose their sensitivity and consequently become insulin resistant. So could you maybe just speak about, what is, firstly, what is insulin resistance? And from what I've been reading, should we really be calling it insulin resistance? Is that the correct term for it?
Yeah. Okay, so the common thought is you eat carbs, they spike insulin, you have a lot of insulin, your body gets kind of used to that high insulin, so it requires more to do the same thing, and then eventually your pancreas can't keep up, and then you get diabetes. And this is really not how it happens, and there's literature going back at least into the 90s and earlier. I think one of the citations that Taubes uses is early 80s. I want to say 82. Mm. It says exactly the opposite of what he said it does. And so what's really happening? I mean, and if you look at all of these cultures the Pima Indians in Arizona are, kind of the poster children for diabetes. They're as a society now, currently, they have the highest rates of obesity and the highest rates of diabetes of anybody. And since it's a relatively isolated culture, whatever genetic factors you have in there are kind of magnified because they've been together. So what did they used to eat? Well, they used to eat an 80% carb diet that was heavy on legumes and grains and a little bit of fish, and that's like basically how they used to eat. So then when they were transferred over to rations where they had a lot of processed white flour and sugar and fat, they became obese and diabetic, etc. So you can't. How can you say that the carbohydrates did it?
Yeah.
Because this is the same genetics over a period of 100, 150 years, and so you can't look at a culture like that and say, well, the carbohydrate caused that. And I think that the biggest misconception is that the postprandial with the after eating insulin spike is what causes chronic hyperinsulinemia.
Yeah.
I mean to have a high fasting insulin level has nothing to do with your insulin responses to a meal. So, I mean, I think the half-life, which is how long it takes for half of the insulin to be cleared from the system, I think the half-life of insulin that's produced by your body is something like 8 to 20 minutes or something. I think 20 minutes is the longest I've seen.
Right.
So, unless you are literally eating carbs all day at night, there's just no way that your insulin, your baseline insulin, would be high based on having even a huge carby meal at midnight.
Yeah. Because
that insulin would have been out of your system long ago. So and also the notion that, and this is the mistaken notion, is that insulin is required to move carbs into your cells. And I can give you a link because I have a blog post that looks at two very seminal papers that show that in diabetics, even the rate of glucose uptake, what they do is they use radioactive dietary glucose, and they can trace and see the levels of that glucose and distinguish it from the stuff that's made by your liver, and the transport rates, the clearance rates are the same. Yeah. So it's not this idea that we're kind of clogged sinks and backed up, and that we can't uptake the glucose is just it's incorrect. And and they showed this too with the mice, because they knocked out the insulin receptors in their muscles, and the mice were fine. They didn't become diabetic or hyperglycemic. So it seems to be the insulin resistance is if it is a resistance to the hormone, occurs in the liver. This seems to be where it does, and then perhaps in the fat cells. Although I don't know so much if it's insulin resistance or just the inability for the fat cell to maintain kind of its equilibrium once it gets filled to a certain extent. I don't know exactly.
I mean, I'll just to let everyone know that for this episode there will be a downloadable sheet on the website, and all of these little links that Ev spoke about will hopefully get those onto there, so people can do some further reading.
We'll definitely do that.
Yeah, and I mean, one of your blogs that you, I've forgotten what it's called, which one it is, but from reading a few of the papers, it seems the site at which insulin resistance initiates is actually the fat cell.
Yes.
And, dysregulated fat metabolism may be the trigger to insulin resistance. And just that's basically the opposite of what everyone in the industry is saying, and with the dogma that it's the carbohydrate's fault. And I think you've just explained that pretty well, that it's not in fact the carbohydrate at all.
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole big thing is this idea. I don't know how much it's discussed over on your side of the pond, but we hear this term, this internal starvation, where if you eat carbs, then this locks the fat in your cells, so in your fat cells, so that they don't get to your other cells, so your other cells are starving. And Lustig has propagated this, and Taub started this, and Dr. Eades. There's a few more that are into this whole, internal starvation, and it just doesn't really occur. The fatty acid release from an obese person's fat cells is the rate is reduced, but I think that is insulin trying to keep it in.
Yeah. But
the overall net delivery to the cells is higher, and the net uptake by the muscle cells is higher in obese. And generally, obese people have higher stores of triglycerides within their muscle cells. And so, this idea that the carbohydrates are causing the fat to be locked into the fat cells, it's totally incorrect. So it seems that what really goes wrong first is that the fat cell is unable to, properly trap dietary fat.
Yeah.
And then it's unable to keep, the fat, because we constantly have fat circulating in and out of our fat cells. And then whenever we eat fat, we have to our fat cells have to suck it up pretty quickly to clear that out of our bloodstream. And, anytime that fat has to cross a membrane, it has to be disassembled from the triglyceride into the fatty acids, and then the fatty acids can get transported, and then it's reesterified back into the triglyceride, which keeps it in the cell. And it's constantly going back and forth between those two forms. And, it seems Keith Frayne is probably the premier researcher in this area. I've blogged on so many of his papers, and there are definitely others. He's not some lone renegade proposing something kind of wild and out there. There's very many researchers who've shown the same thing, and I mean, I believe that if you look at the diabetes research, they're all aware of this, but it doesn't seem to have translated into the popular understanding.
Yeah.
And certain doctors don't. I guess they're not taught this, even though it is. It's really pretty well established. It's not like this is someone's harebrained.
Well, maybe this episode will be the trigger to that.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah.
I really, when I hear that, certain people are talking to medical students and they're learning that eating carbs causes insulin resistance. I want to bust a gut, because it's like that's not what the science says, and it's darn good science. It's not really bad science. I mean, I think that nutritional science gets a bad name by some of these dietary RCTs that nobody follows the diet and they get ridiculous results. But it's like, there's some really good research that's been done out there, and don't tar everybody with the same the same brush, whatever the cliche is, because they really have done a lot of good work, and and then the other thing that's really, and this was the article that I wrote for Alan Aragon's research review, was about quote unquote insulin resistance, and whether or not that is truly insulin resistance or if it's beta cell deficiency or insulin deficiency. And it's really been pretty well known for decades now that the first thing to go in the oral glucose tolerance test is the initial insulin response.
Yeah.
So, as this progresses, instead of having your insulin spike and peak at about 30 minutes, it doesn't get stimulated. That first part is missing. And glucagon is also supposed to be suppressed so that you stop producing glucose in your liver when you are taking it in, and that doesn't happen. So and then eventually, so you have this greater insulin spike a little bit later on down the line, and when it progresses to diabetes, you're really at a point where you are insulin deficient, even at the early stages of type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people look and they say, well, but they're hyperinsulinemic, so how could you say they have plenty of insulin? I hear this one all the time. Well, no, a type 2 never needs insulin. They make plenty of insulin. Look at their fasting insulin levels. They're through the roof. And it's like, yeah, but that's because of other things. It has nothing to do with having, their insulin is through the roof, but when they eat carbs, they're not producing insulin properly to basically suppress the glucose production in the liver.
Well, I think that is basically what's really interesting. That's going against a lot of the dogma out there. So what we'll do is we'll link quite a few of your blogs on the downloadable sheet, so people can go away and further read into that, and also your contact details, so people can ask you questions, if they want, if that's all right.
Sure.
But kind of just summing up, then let's go back to making it a bit more simple. The whole dogma surrounding carbs, we're kind of just saying, look, to everyone out there, there is nothing wrong with carbohydrates, and the reason why you're going to lose weight if you throw out carbs. So people like, I don't eat bread anymore, I don't eat cereal, I don't have white rice, and all this kind of behaviour is just bringing down your whole calorie intake, and that is exactly why you're losing weight. So
exactly, yeah.
Thanks for that. That's the exact point that I just want all the general population listening to go away and think about. I see it a lot in beginner clients, especially, or who will come to me having followed a certain diet, and it's usually the macronutrient carbs that people demonise, and it's come from nowhere, and you have to re-educate these people a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think that it's part of the kind of rebel thing about some people, I guess. You want to point a finger of blame or say, well, the government screwed us up by telling us, to eat the food pyramid and whatever. And it's like, well, first of all, sugar is way up there on the peak of our old food pyramid. So they never said go out and eat, Fruit Loops and ice cream and whatever to make that your meal. So, I think that if most people actually ate what we were told, whether or not you agree with that being how you want to eat, but if people actually ate according to that, I don't think that there would be a problem. So then people look and they say, well, look at all these carby foods, and they show pictures of burgers and pizzas and donuts and stuff. And it's like, well, if you look at the nutrition information on a lot of those, there's a lot of fat in there too. And there's just a lot of calories.
Yeah, I can't understand why people blame, they'll blame carbs and they'll say, look at that pizza. And I'm like, well, it's not, it's actually probably more fat than carbs anyway.
Yeah, well, and then they go and the favorite thing in the low carb world is to either make a pizza, which is to use
Yeah,
like bacon as a crust, or they use this like a cream cheese and egg concoction, which is also just more fat, and they either do that or they just eat the pizza toppings.
yeah.
And I mean, heck, I could eat the toppings off of an entire pizza,
Mm.
but I don't think I could eat, well, when I was young, when I could eat a lot of pizza, but I mean, I get full very fast. Carbs actually fill me up. I don't understand this notion that carbs are not filling that some people have. But I
Yeah.
mean, I would rather eat one slice of pizza and have a real slice of pizza than eat an entire pizza's worth of toppings. I mean, that's just like, and you get like twice. I mean, that would fill me up less, and you get like 5 times the calories because that's where most of the calories are.
Yeah.
They're in the sauce and the cheese and everything, and then
So those
the
hidden
crust.
ones. So all those hidden calories,
Yeah, but I mean, it's the notion that and the thing is, it's really funny that, and I'll try and make sure I put this in our show notes. There's a paper out by Westman and Volek and Finney and Vernon. I can't remember all, pretty much the who's who in the low carb diet industry.
Yeah.
They published a paper on the low carb diet in a nutrition journal. And in it, they say all of these things, basically, that there's a spontaneous reduction in calories, and that they don't, people who are instructed to go on a low-carb diet and just follow the general rules, basically just cut carbohydrates, but they're not increasing their fat intake or their protein intake. They just essentially, sometimes they increase protein as a percent a little bit because they're eating a little more meat. But they don't increase their fat, and a lot of times, and in most of the diet studies, they've reduced it at least a little bit.
Yeah.
And overall, because they're just eating less. So I mean, it's harder to eat as much butter unless you're a certain person, by the stick, than if it's spread on a nice sourdough bread or something like that. Obviously, you're just going to eat a lot less of everything if you're not eating, if you're cutting out that entire group. And the same thing goes with fat. I wouldn't suggest doing that with protein. That would be kind of a ridiculous.
That would be crazy.
Thing.
Don't do that.
I mean, that's really what I think drives a lot of it too. Is, and when you look at a lot of these quote unquote fattening foods, most of them have a lot of fat and a lot of carbs and are quite low in protein percentage wise. So, I mean, I know there's just way too much research out there showing that, protein is satiating, and that, there's a decent amount of evidence to say that there's some kind of a protein leverage, that if you basically get your protein, that kind of regulates everything else for a while at least.
Well, you do see that. Well, I do see that in all my clients who eat sufficient protein anyway. Especially the ones who are, the ones who come to you and seem to binge a lot at the weekends and that type of thing. And as soon as you just kind of put the protein intake where it should be, all the binging stops.
Yeah, a little bit more protein and not demonizing certain foods, so that you feel like, oh, I can't have that anytime.
And then you want it.
A lot of people, this was kind of the point of in my book is about, this is how eating disorders and the so-called food addiction develop, I think, in most people. You have situations where a traumatic incident occurs or something, some psychological issues occur that people develop anorexia or bulimia or something. But a lot of the times, so often, and it was the case with me, it's just you go on a diet to lose a couple pounds, you lose a few pounds, you start looking good, you get a bunch of compliments, so you cut calories a little more, and then then you start saying, well, I can't even, I'll just put lemon juice on that salad instead of the oil, because who needs the oil that has those calories? And before you know it, kind of you can't eat normally anymore, because every food is fattening. So then it's like when you eat that food, it's like, okay, well, I might as well eat the whole package of cookies now, right?
Yeah.
So this is just from being on Facebook, and I've met a few of your clients on Facebook and other people that know you, and just tons and tons of people, and it's such a familiar story. You get into this mindset that you can't eat these certain foods or you'll get fat, and so you don't eat them. But then when you do have one, you just can't stop.
Yeah.
And so you're binging, and you're taking in. You could be eating 1,000 calories a day for a month on end, and then go on a binge over the weekend and undo an entire
and
deficit.
that is a huge topic that I want to get into at some point. The idea that people eat 1,000 calories day in, day out, and they can't lose weight, and if they were in fact just eating 1,000 calories, they wouldn't be overweight per se,
Yeah, I mean, I think that to some degree in most people that's true, that there's you're probably not, but you don't necessarily have to be binging either. It depends on the person, because especially women, especially us short women, we just don't, I don't remember ever eating a lot, like even
Right.
when I was very athletic. I was a 3 varsity sport, just, super athletic, lean kid, and always running around and doing stuff. And I don't remember eating 5,000 calories. I don't even think I ever ate more than maybe 2,000 calories a day. I just can't. I have a pretty good memory of how I used to eat, or what I used to eat when my mom prepared everything at the time, and it just. So I think we, short women especially, we just don't eat, burn a lot of calories, even if you're really active, and So you get, you're kind of at the short end of the stick. I married a guy who can eat 3,500 calories a day. So it's always been kind of a struggle, because, it's hard to just say, it's like, well, he can go and eat anything he wants, and it doesn't matter. And you're always kind of feeling like, well, I can't eat that, or I can only have a bite of that. It gets kind of frustrating.
Yeah.
So, you just eat like a quote unquote normal person, and you start gaining weight, and it gets to be a bit frustrating. And I think that's where I think some of these carb loading and cheat meal things actually do work if you use them properly. Because if you are just have a lower calorie expenditure, and you have to eat within, say, 1,200 calories a day, and let's make that a little bit more reasonable. We'll say about 1,700 calories a day. So let's say that you have to eat that. By the time you're getting your protein in and your good nourishing foods, there's just no room for anything extra. But you know what? If you ate a few fewer calories during the week, then you can splurge but not binge on the weekend. So I think
that's a technique I use with a lot of clients, well, especially the ones you're on about, short women. Short women get that treatment.
Yes, us shorties.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say, but... So, yeah, we'll wrap it up there, Ev. We're coming up to 1 hour, I think, but hopefully it's been a...
Wow, that went fast.
Yeah, it did, didn't it? Hopefully it's been great for people to listen to. Don't forget, guys, to go on iTunes and rate and review this for us. I'd really appreciate that. And again, if you want any more information on the podcast itself, or on just this episode in particular, then go ahead to epicfitnesssummit.com, and everything will be on there. So that's it, Ev.
Right, great.
Thank
you very much for having me.
No worries. Bye.
It's in the can.